How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Yes, I ask everybody the same first question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
It can be a very long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I'm born in Stockholm, grew up in Stockholm, spent a year in high school in America when I was 16, 17. And then I came back and did another 2 years, did military service in Stockholm, which was then mandatory. Studied art history at the same time that I did military service. And then during the summer after military service, I wanted to find a art school to maybe go there for two to 3 months, which I found that summer. And then I continued my studies in art history in the fall of 87, long time ago. And then in January 88, I went to Florence to that school, which I had found during the trip in the summer after military service. And then my money ran out, but my father helped me, so I could stay 2 semesters in Florence. And then I went back to Stockholm and I started studying architecture at the Royal Institute of Technology. My father's an architect, one of my brothers is an architect, and it's sort of in my blood. But then during that year, I realized, no, I have to go back to Florence and study. So I officially took a study break, went back to Florence for another couple of years, met a young Dutch girl, my current wife still. And then actually in 91, when I had finished, my studies, I didn't get a diploma, everything, but I just felt now was the time to move on. And so we went to Amsterdam for 1 or 2 years. So I've been here painting in Amsterdam for the last 33 years. That's very short.
What led you to become a painter?
A bit weird, but I had a very broad interest. I really liked school. Science was my major, but I always read a lot, drew, painted a lot. I don't know. The brother above me was extremely good at drawing out of his head, which I could not really do, still can't really do. Subconsciously, I loved doing it, but I never had enough time. And once I went to Florence the first time for 2 semesters, it was like taking a poison which I could never get out of my body. A passion was born which never really left me. So I've never ever said I want to become an artist or a painter. That decision or that profession was just a consequence of my drive to want to paint, which sounds very cliche, whatever. Because my mother's aunt was a sculptress, married to a painter. And, they had a beautiful life together, but, it was a tough life. So I never really took a decision. It's just a consequence of wanting to do it. And then once I had a couple of commissions, sold some paints, and all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I'm actually an artist. Or a professional artist, whatever. Yeah. I'm living from what I'm doing.
Yes. Van Gogh, he wasn't a professional artist. He sold 1 painting. Yeah. So is he professional or amateur?
That's true. I mean, he had definitely the drive. He had, luckily, his brother that helped him. I'm not talking economically. I'm just actually doing it the whole time. And I was able to survive from it.
What I meant is professional and amateur doesn't exist in art, I would say. I know many painters who paint as a hobby. They produce more and they paint better than some people that I went to school with.
Yeah.
Since I was 6 or 7, I decided to be a painter and a writer. I am a painter and I am a writer. I have a huge admiration for everybody who wants to be an artist. And you, as a Swede, know that in Sweden, art is not considered a noble thing.
There's a big difference. I spent a lot of time in Italy. And if you go to the local restaurant where you always go, they call you maestro, which, whatever, or artista. Being an artist in Italy is something amazing, which is really considered, like you say, as a sort of noble profession, because they are surrounded by the great art. Visual arts in Holland is so much part of the sort of genes of the Dutch people. But of course, you can't really compare it to Sweden because, Sweden hasn't had that many great if you talk about painters. Somebody growing up in Holland grows up and gets sort of, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Frans Hals, you get that with breast milk in a way. So it doesn't mean that everybody knows a lot about art history, but there is a little bit of difference.
Yes,
but I think also as an artist and as you, I think it's fantastic what you're doing. The task in a way of an artist is also to somehow educate.
It's very hard in Sweden to be an artist.
But I think it's hard anywhere.
Can you walk us through your daily routines when you start painting?
It depends a bit also in periods of the year. If I have a lot of portrait commissions, I always want an hour before the sitting to make my palette, prepare the colors, and really sit down in front of the painting to think what needs to be done, what is lagging behind, and to make a sort of a plan. Because once you get going, it's extremely intense, and I think it's good mentally to sort of prepare yourself for, what should I do and not do. And then with still lifes, it's a bit the same. But of course, if I come in and I paint still life the whole day, I don't have to be here at 8:30, whatever. I always want a bit of time to prepare, especially the colors. I usually have like 4 different lead whites on my palette. That takes time to find the right textures. Especially with portrait painting, you need to have everything prepared because you don't want to miss time when the sitter comes. In the winter, in Holland, I think the darkest, I can paint until 4:30, end of December. Shorter days, and in the summer, they're longer days. So, in the summer, you can start later and paint until later if you want, whatever. So that's one part of it. And, I always want to have a sort of order in my studio. Some people love to work in chaos, and I'm not that kind of person.
No, me neither.
I need to have less distractions around them.
Do you listen to the music when you paint?
Yes, I listen to music, classical music. I painted a portrait of a famous actor here in Holland who had won the prize. And I painted this which we started out, and he had new music, or classical music, John Dowland, which is sort of English time of Shakespeare music, which I didn't know. So we played that, and it depends a bit. Playing music is not so much for me, it's for the sitters, for them to feel, comfortable and at ease.
You paint as old masters, Rembrandt, Frans Hals, and for them light was very important.
Yeah.
How do you approach capturing it?
Different things. I'm now sitting opposite the north light window in my studio, which goes up from 1.5 meters up to nearly 6 meters. And I have lots of different curtains to control the light. The interesting thing is, now, for instance, there is not a cloud in the sky, but most of the time it's cloudy, it's overcast. And that's actually the nicest light, strange enough.
Sfumato?
Yeah, well, it comes in more concentrated.
Aha, okay.
You have a blue sky, but in Holland, the blue sky is never completely blue. It's not like in Sweden or in Provence, it's incredibly blue sky. When there's blue sky and the light comes in, it sort of spreads everywhere. But if it's overcast, it comes in more concentrated. And one theory could be, that's maybe one of the reasons why there's so many fantastic Dutch painters in the 20th century. I don't know, but that's one thing. So the light for me is incredibly important. And the light changes. Since I only work from life, I'm not trying to copy nature. If I have a sitting or I work on a still life and one day is cloudy, the other day is blue sky, it's going to change things. Of course, you're trying to create painting that works. But a lot of times the light is one of the great inspirations. If I set up a still life or I'm out painting a landscape, the light is actually sort of forming the idea for a painting in some ways.
Yeah, I saw this dignity and stillness in your model. And how do you achieve that?
Well, I have no idea.
Okay.
No, I always talk about, if you talk about painting people, it's extremely complicated. I've said many times, in one way, it's a bit like walking on a tightrope and holding the balance. One of the parts, it's the rational analysis of values, drawing, and everything. And the other side is sort of intuition. And these two have to work together to be able to walk forward. I guess the intuition part gives also the depth in painting a human being. You cannot say, I'm going to paint this in a dignified way, or this person has this character, this model, like that. It's something that comes through the different sittings, I think, with the help of some kind of intuition. You can choose the pose, and the pose is also rational in a way, thinking of how the light falls on a certain person, but it's also sort of intuition. So it's a combination, I think, of many things. But I like this stillness. And I think that's also, in a way, the great future of oil painting, because we're so bombarded with photographs in this digital time. And oil painting has a different level to it.
I was wondering what is the most challenging painting that you did, or most technically difficult painting that you made?
Well, all paintings are big challenges, and it's very difficult for me to judge, because the process has to do with the circumstances around. So it's very difficult to say, okay, this painting was more complicated, because it might be because of the pressure or the circumstance. That's a complicated question, but
I'm sorry, I will ask you only the light questions.
Yeah, no. It's a good question, but I find it technically most difficult. I guess if you are challenged by your materials, then it becomes very complicated. If I'm not working on a hand-ground canvas, which I have done for the last 25 years or 20 years, if I sometimes have to work on a different canvas, that can be a great technical challenge. But visually, I think all the paintings are great challenges. I can't really say that one has been more difficult than the other. I can say, one of the biggest landscapes that I did in Provence, that was complicated, but it's also the circumstance where I was doing it, with the wind and the horseflies biting my feet while I was painting, and so forth and so forth. And then I can say, well, the challenge painting a commission outside my studio is both maybe more a mental challenge than a technical one. I have one very big painting of, I think, the first Smiling Eve in the history of art. That sounds a bit arrogant. Maybe it is. It was part of the 2 retrospective exhibitions in Stockholm and also in The Hague. And it's hanging in my studio, but it's a big painting. It's maybe more of a museum painting than that somebody privately would show it or privately buy it or be in a gallery. Big painting, like your painting, 6 meters. Maybe some of the paintings have sort of different home to be found.
Thank you for the compliment, though, that I should have a museum.
Yeah. Thank you. Not your own museum, but...
No, I know what you mean. Thank you. Yeah. What does success mean to you?
One of the things with being a painter, and you also see it in the history of art, it's a pursuit where you never fully accomplish what you set out to do. That's why we're continuing. You see it also, the expression in Rembrandt's self-portrait as St. Paul in the Rijksmuseum. He gives you a look of being embarrassed that we're looking at his painting. But he's also sort of saying, but this is the best I can do. It's my own interpretation, but that's how I see the expression in his paintings. I think this success when it comes to painting is when you feel that you're in the flow and you feel that you're, after a sitting or after a day of painting, that you've accomplished something which maybe was more than you had expected of yourself in some sense. And on the other hand, I think that some of the most amazing moments I've had is when people have been so emotionally moved to tears looking at my paintings. And that has happened a few times. And I think then I feel I have accomplished to move somebody emotionally. And in that sense, since there is so much emotion involved in actually painting it, if that can be communicated somehow to somebody else, that is for me a great feeling and a great feeling of accomplishment.
Does art has universal language, or is it always shaped by a culture?
I think great art in the history of mankind goes beyond its specific time and can speak to people from different times and different cultures. But of course, we are involved in, or what I'm involved is, and the art of the Western civilization. But you can also look at great Chinese art or Japanese art, which is fantastic. Also, Japanese art was very inspiring for Van Gogh. But I see myself in a big perspective, and I see myself as being part of this Western culture. There's a lot that has happened in the art world the last 50 years or 100 years. I think the important thing is and I've sort of been stubborn, but follow my ideas and follow my, sort of keep my integrity and just keep on going in what I believe to be the thing that's inspiring me, but what's also has a place in this great span of Western civilization. So I think seeing a sculpture by Praxitele or beautiful Hellenistic sculpture or Roman portrait or the fresco of the Livia's garden in Rome or seeing art from 15th century onwards, there is a sort of a lot of times a red thread at the great art pieces where you can communicate, you can feel emotionally connected to these works of art. And I think it's important also, like you, I study a lot of history. I think the more you know of history, the more you see yourself as just one small part in the bigger perspective. And that's, in a way, how I see myself as an artist. In 100 years, people are sure going to think, they would clearly see, this is typically something from beginning of 21st century and so forth. But maybe now it's not obvious, but I don't really care. I just believe in what I'm doing, and that's what I'm doing.
And can you, for the audience, explain why do you choose to do naturalistic art?
It's a personal question on one side, and on the other side, I believe in that the great art in the history of art has always been art that is founded on some kind of knowledge too. There has to be some kind of magic where you would never think you could do it yourself. It sounds very superficial, but I think there is this importance of actually trying to get the knowledge to do something very complicated and even maybe make it look simple, but with an incredible knowledge, and learning how to paint, for example, a life-size portrait from life is extremely complicated, and it takes years to get it. You create something which is unique, and also by painting from life, you get a signature. You get your personal style. I don't think one should try artificially to create your own style. By working from life and with oil paint, there will be your personal signature in the work. The fascinating thing with oil painting is very close to yourself. You're observing, it goes through your brain, you interpret, you make thousands of choices, you mix the paint, and boom, you go on, you hit the canvas. It's a personal choice, and I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, and that's enough as well.
Yeah.
What people don't know, and I'm trying to do this YouTube, is to show that Picasso didn't become Picasso. He went through sweat and blood to learn how to paint like you, to paint like Rembrandt, only to slowly starting experimenting with color and with shapes.
Yeah.
Or Jackson Pollock, he just didn't wake up one day and start painting and splashing colors.
Yeah.
A lot of contemporary artists start from that, from splashing colors, and never learn how to real life modeling.
Yeah.
And that's very confusing for me. My question for you, do you feel pressure to adapt your work to contemporary trends from the audience, from the...
Not at all.
Okay.
I see a lot of contemporary art, but for me, it's a different endeavor somehow. I can be inspired by modern dance, ballet, or whatever, but contemporary art, I don't know. I'm still busy with trying to develop my art. And I find the interesting thing is also, of course, you develop as a person. So you never really can accomplish what you set out to do because you're always changing, you're learning more, you're seeing more art. So you're always lagging behind. So it's a continuous process. And I think if you artificially try to play with what is going on outside too much, are you true to yourself then? I think most important in art is that you're true to yourself. And if that's being true to yourself, adapting it contemporary art, fine, but it's not how I am.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
But do you think that figurative painting is now going through some kind of a revival, or it was always been there and endured quietly in the background?
I've seen a big change. When Pietro Annigoni was working in Florence and in London in the 50s and 60s and 70s, he was one of the few. And most other figurative painters was sort of called nearly fascistic, or it was parallel to the socialistic art of Soviet Union. And there's a big change. Absolutely has been a revival. And I think it always goes up and down, but I think realistic art has, or figurative art has much more acceptance now, but not maybe with the big contemporary art museums. So the parallel is interesting. So in the end of 19th century, what we call the Impressionists or the early modernists, they were the ones that were not accepted by the establishment. The establishment was the academic world. Now it's the opposite. So you have the establishment, the ones who run the art academies, where if you want to paint, they say, well, painting, why would you want to paint? There is a stream of a lot of young people who actually want to learn something. I think it's interesting, but we talk about now and the last 20 years. There is not one way. I mean, art is so big. Art is, if somebody says I'm doing art, then it's art. Before it was a whole different ballgame. But I see that there's just such a broad variety of things. When we talk about installation, and also the thing about longevity of an artwork. I mean, art, and I think literature and composing music has always had a link to making a mark in your own life that will outlive yourself. And a lot of contemporary art build up an installation or something with materials, it disappeared, or it's just for an exhibition. That's fine. I'd like my paintings to actually hang on for a couple hundred years. If they end up in a basement or in a cellar, I think it's important that the art also stays on.
Here on the Academy on Valand in Gothenburg, I tried to apply for masters 4 times, and I was denied all 4 times because I wanted to paint. And one of the teachers that I met later in life told me, why would you paint when you can do installation? And I told him that that's not the way I function. And he said, but that's why you are not on the masters. What I wanted to ask you is then, what do you think this contemporary modern art is for if audience don't understand it and many artists are confused by it?
Contemporary art is such an incredibly broad kind of name. I'm contemporary. I live now.
Yeah, we are both are. Yeah, I understand.
But since it's such a broad spectrum, it's very difficult to generalize. But what I find sad in a way is that, and that might have to do with the education, that cultural education in schools are not as it used to be. It is sad that a lot of people don't dare to say anything or say if it's good or interesting unless they have the knowledge. So if art cannot say something which cannot be described exactly in words, then visual arts has no meaning anyway.
We spoke about Rembrandt and Vermeer and many others, but which old masters have the greatest impact on your work and why?
I don't have one. There's just so many. Many years ago, I copied Van Dyck portrait in a museum in Antwerp. A few years later, I had a portrait commission in Madrid, and I copied a big Van Dyck painting in Prado. I admire Van Dyck a lot, Velasquez and good Frans Hals and Rembrandt is of course amazing, but not always. Every painter is a bit uneven. Van Dyck is pretty even, but if you talk about Van Dyck from 1620s, is very different from Van Dyck 1632 and very different from a Van Dyck 1638. So, it depends on the paintings in a way. A lot of 18th century fantastic painters, still life or portraits, and 19th century, great landscape painters and some great portrait painters. Sargent is incredible. And I just gave a lecture last week in Florence about Sargent. He's in a way a modern painter, but he's working with the visual philosophy of painters from the past. So nobody should try to imitate a painter, of course, but, there are some painters who are doing it. But you have to emulate. So you learn lessons from different painters that you put in your head as an arsenal of knowledge. So when you're actually painting, you can maybe remember a few things. How did they solve that? Of course, as a Swede, I'm great admirer of Zorn.
The old masters that speaking to me directly, I have to say it's Vermeer and El Greco. I'm an art historian. I admire them almost equally. And this is called the immortal art. There's a reason for it.
Vermeer is fantastic too. The common denominator between really great art is also this immortality or the timelessness. When you're actually standing in front of a painting, portrait of the Pope by Velasquez in Rome, or the portrait of Juan de Pareja, his assistant, and you stand there for a couple of minutes. And this is also an important thing. These are not fast things. These are being painted with a lot of knowledge through several sittings. They are nearly breathing. You nearly communicate.
It's maybe a superficial question, but if you could pick one or two old masters and watch them paint, who would it be?
Rembrandt painting Jan 6. He was doing something which was sort of new, and he experimented, and he must have felt so comfortable doing it. And I think Rembrandt was probably quite a complicated, character, pretty intense. I think would have been extremely interesting.
Yeah. But is a painting a way of thinking for you, or is something else?
It is extremely intense, and it's extremely complicated, but at the same time, it is such an unbelievable fortunate situation to be able to actually do it, and that's easy to forget.
Is act of painting a meditation, a prayer, relaxation, or frustration for you?
It's all of it.
Sorry that I'm laughing, but
no. Yeah, I'm maybe answer your question too easily, but it is in a way it's meditation, but it depends on what you paint. There's an incredible joy and a kind of meditation, but at times also it's super intense, since you have to make so many choices the whole time and also let yourself go, which is the combination is not always very easy. But
I never believed in inspiration, or inspiration in the sense, oh, I'm waiting for inspiration. I'm always for a hunt for inspiration, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So, how do you see inspiration?
The more I paint, the more inspired I get, which means the more ideas comes into my mind of paintings or how I should, solve a problem. I'm absolutely not a person sitting and waiting for inspiration. I think for me, I have to be active.
How solitary is the act of painting?
I think it's extremely solitary. If you paint, if you share a studio or you're studying with other people around you, it's different, because if you're a student, you can have friends looking at your work and during the breaks, and you can have input from others. But in the end, it is you who put the paint on the canvas. And I found that was a bit complicated after leaving Florence and moving to Amsterdam to actually start to paint yourself, because you have to give yourself a critique or whatever, and you slowly but surely you realize that it is very solitary. you are responsible for everything. So when it goes well, you feel, extremely happy. When you're frustrated, you cannot. And I guess for a writer, it's very much the same. You're working, a lot goes on in your head, and you can't sort of split your head with somebody during the process of working. One of the beauties of it, that it is solitary, but it also makes it also has a heavy part to it, that you are solely responsible for the paint that's put on the canvas.
The last three questions are very important to me. It gives a little bit of personality of an artist that I'm having a dialogue with. Yeah. So, what is art for you?
What is art for me? That's a long question and needs a long answer. But art for me is something which moves emotionally, has an emotional impact through the visual, and something of sort of feeling of reverence, awe.
How would you like to be remembered?
As somebody who tried. No, I remember. I'd like to be remembered as a good husband and father, but no, as an artist, I'd like to be remembered as somebody who maybe occasionally gave that feeling of awe or emotional visual impact.
If you could have a dinner, a coffee break, a beer in a pub, a dinner, I don't know, or a quiet walk somewhere with any historical or any fictional character, who would it be and why?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I could think of many. I think it could be, one would be extremely interesting, would be to have a walk and talk with Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow humble attitude, but still being the ruler of the whole known world. Yes. But a philosopher as he was, that would have been interesting. But also ask him why the hell he
to come on this
son.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Everybody wonders that.
There's so many people, but I think that that could be interesting.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Urban.
Thank you very much.
When I saw your art, I said, "Oh God damn it! I must speak with this Urban guy." And when you answered me and when you said yes to this, I was very happy. How people can find you?
If you Google Urban Larsson, SSON, I have a big website also where there is, on the website is also the documentary made on me when I had the retrospective exhibitions. And lots of paintings and articles, written words and so forth. But also I'm on Instagram, Facebook, which my lovely oldest daughter is taking care of, and LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel, but those things are also on my website. So I think it's been great, and I think you're doing an important thing to actually educate people with art history, like you're saying, and thoughts about art. Because we are, of course, living in a world where it's not the most common thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That was a pleasure. Yeah.
And I hope we will do this in the future again.
Yeah. And if you're ever in Amsterdam, just let me know.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I've never been to Amsterdam.
Come and visit the studio.
Never been to Amsterdam.
No? Well, you have to.
I didn't have a right passport to travel. Now, when I have a right passport to travel, I don't have money, and I have a 5-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
I cannot travel. So, it's always something.
Yeah.
Yes.
But things change.
Yes. Have fun.
Yeah. Take care.
Fun.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.